to call on Bruce to come and lead us in our efforts to be faithful in our stewardship, generous in our stewardship, and to be sustainers of what God has already richly given us. And he'll probably ask to go around the room for everybody to introduce themselves again to him, but I'll leave that up to Bruce. Bruce?
Don, thank you. And as always, it's a privilege to be with my colleagues in I was unmuted. Sorry. It's great to be with you all. It's always good to be with my colleagues in Kentucky. And like Don, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have the support of the Orrin E. Scott Foundation that allowed us to put this program together, to have some in-person events, to have these webinars. And you also have access to some individual time with the Center for Faith and Giving, should you choose to use that. So know that that's out there and available to you, along with those annual campaign resources. It's just, there's a smorgasbord of things for you to choose from. And we hope you will eat your fill on what's available. I'm going to be sharing my screen here in just a minute and put up our slides for tonight. We're going to be thinking about flourishing congregations, as Don has already mentioned. I do think it would be great for us to just kind of go around and say who we are. So I'm going to let you each take a turn, but I'm going to start with Chuck because he is at the top of my screen. So go ahead, Chuck. who you are and where you are. And what would you like to get out?
My name is Chuck, and this is Stephen.
Hi, Stephen.
I'm the pastor at Clintonville Christian Church in Bourbon County, and that's about the extent of it.
What would you like to get out of tonight?
Just continued learning.
Okay.
I mean, it never hurts to revisit certain core lessons. So
very good. We'll let somebody else introduce themselves and where you are and what you'd like to get out of tonight.
I'm Linda Kemp, and I'm also a member at Clintonville Christian Church, a retired clergy that has spent her life in fundraising and stewardship development, and I see this as a refresher.
Thanks. Who's next?
This is Rick Loader in Bardstown, Kentucky, calling on behalf of Mayfield First Christian Church, where I'm doing an interim. And I just hope to earn a couple bucks through this.
We'll see what we can do.
Now, Mayfield obviously has some major financial projects ahead of them. They're one of the churches that got wiped out in Mayfield area with the tornado. And I'm just getting some insights of the different options they have.
Well, we're glad you're there and providing leadership in a time of transition and rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening. This is Vion Thomas. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm at Second Christian in Mayfield, and I'm just a long old-time member of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and would basically like to one learn how to improve my personal financial wellness, which will affect how the congregation, the church, also does their job their efforts, makes their efforts in terms of improving financial health and wellness, how that plays out. Just see how that plays out in terms of the congregation. And it's certainly something that needs to be done. Although our congregation was not devastated like First Christian was and several other faith communities in Mayfield, there's still some core issues that need to be done in order for that church to thrive. And so I'm here to gain all the information I can and to share.
Well, we're glad to have you, and we will actually have a whole webinar dedicated to our own personal finance in our series as it continues into next year. So we'll look forward to having you be a continuing part of this experience, and welcome.
Thank you. Yes, I will.
Did IFC 94 ever get connected? We don't know who that is, but well, we're going to go on and hope that they're able to hear us. If they do not wish to tell us who they are, that's okay. We'll accept anonymous visitors today. The information we have is for everyone. I'm going to apologize right now for the fact that at more than one point in this evening, I am no doubt going to be coughing. I am recovering from something. I wish I knew what it was. But it has been an upper respiratory thing, and it's meant cough and sinus problems and, all that fun stuff. And so at the end of the day, unfortunately, is when my voice finally starts to wear down and the coughing is I'm a little more susceptible to. But I'll just apologize once here at the beginning for that, and we'll go on from there. Tonight, what we're going to look at are marks of vital congregations. This reflects some research that was done about 15 years ago by Dr. Barbara Fullerton in the United Church of Canada. And then we've been building on that work for most of the time since then. I was real intrigued with her work when I encountered her in my ecumenical partnerships with the Center for Faith and Giving, with other stewardship leaders. And her work came about as a doctoral project because she was very curious, as a part of the United Church of Canada, working in a kind of a counterpart to our general ministries, why some churches participated in the wider mission fund and did so generously, and what was different about those than the other congregations. And in the process of that, she developed these cues in studying these congregations and comparing them to the ones who didn't donate, who didn't look beyond themselves. She came up with this idea of marks of a vital congregation. Now, we have expanded on this work and continue to add our own encounters with congregations and our own knowledge about it, but the core work that she did was really very good and is worth our attention. It fits very closely with work that Aaron Cash has been doing in the region with the Lilly Grant, and I know there are some congregations who have been involved in that. So if you are one of those, some of this may look familiar. We have many overlapping points in our research and what we think really matters. So I want to start with just some general ideas about what makes for a vital congregation. And there are some kind of general observations we make. And most of those are somewhat easy to identify and will make sense to you. Congregations that are enjoying a sense of vitality, have a sense of purpose and calling, have a sense of energy. This doesn't mean they're growing, they're not turning into a mega church. That's not one of the marks that we're looking at, though participation is important. But vitality has to do with the sense of purpose and mission, and the sense of generosity that the congregation practices. So we are going to focus a little bit more on stewardship than Aaron Cash's work does. But again, here are these overlapping points. And obviously one of those is the church is not in conflict. The churches that are thriving, that are expressing vitality, are not wasting their energy fighting with each other. They are directing their energy corporately and often outward, as we'll talk about, into the community. They're not fighting with each other. There's not a crisis in leadership. They may even be in a transition of leadership. That's possible. But there's not a crisis in leadership, and there's not a financial crisis in the sense of the only thing they can focus on is survival. when a congregation arrives at a point where the only thing it can think about is keeping its doors open and the lights on, they're usually not able to express other signs of that vitality. So I think that it's kind of obvious, but we'll make that point. The leadership is not dysfunctional and it's not absent. Now, we're not talking about, an autocracy here where one person is in charge. But when we talk about not absent, but that leadership is visible and that leadership is accountable to someone other than themselves. That leadership operates in a healthy partnership with more than one or two individuals. That leadership is shared across clergy lay lines and within kind of concentric circles. So there is a clear sense that there's leadership at the helm, and it's not solely dependent on one person, and that person is accountable for their actions. That they do not operate in a vacuum or apart from people, being able to question and encourage and challenge them. The other thing we notice is that there's a process for decision making. So if there's a constitution, there are bylaws, there's some organizational structure that allows for corporate decision making, and discipleship is modeled in all of the things that happen from leadership and within the context of the congregation. That there's a plan for discipleship, for bringing people deeper into the life of faith, and that is followed. That there's a sense of hope for the church. For disciples, we have a sense that the churches that are vital congregations are developing true community, express deep Christian spirituality, and have a passion for a just world. We understand that the people around us want community. They are hungry for spiritual things and mystery. They want to find their purpose. And thriving churches are aware of that and are looking for ways to connect people to those elements. I just think it's important for us to understand that. So that's kind of a general context in which we would identify churches that are thriving. I want to focus now on leadership, because leadership really is key. It's one of those things that if we were numbering these things, I probably wouldn't even give you a number for it, because it's so foundational and so core to what we're doing, that without good leadership, you just cannot move the ship forward. And it's important to remember how leaders function, that they ask good questions. We don't always have the answers, right? Leadership is in part helping the community arrive at solutions and find the answers together. But we ask good penetrating questions, lots of what if and what about kinds of questions. That the quality of leadership is one that has integrity. That they can be counted on to be consistent, and that we know when they talk and they tell us something, they are telling us the truth. That it comes as an expression of the self, and we can identify that they're for real. Leaders challenge others, and that sometimes is difficult for us, because we don't want to make anybody mad, but sometimes in asking those good questions, sometimes in developing those what ifs and what abouts and could we, there's some challenge that happens, and that's healthy, and that's okay. They encourage people from their own experience and what things are about. And most importantly, they set the tone culturally. They set expectations that they themselves are willing to meet. Good leadership it's a key to success. Leaders lead with passion and conviction. They don't simply say, do as I say, but do as I do. That's a part of that personal integrity. And where this comes into play for a part of our discussion is in generosity. That one of the things that we mark when we're looking at congregations that are doing well is the leadership is invested. The leadership is generous. The leadership believes in the mission, knows the mission, and has some skin in the game. I was taught early on in this work that you cannot ask for money and expect people to be generous if you yourself do not give and are not generous. And that people will see through that. People will be able to identify that. I mentioned already that there's an accountability, and that is to each other in the leadership circle, as well as to the larger whole. And leaders, we hope, will teach others what they know, and not just hold it for themselves, that they will bring others along with them and mentor others. And the leaders show up when you're doing something in the congregation. You are there working shoulder to shoulder and side by side with people who you're asking to lead, you are asking to follow you, that there is a sense of equality, and we're in this together. Excuse me. As I mentioned, leaders are trusted because they do what they say they're going to do. Their words are consistent with their actions. The leaders are invested, and they embody the values of the organization. That's general stuff around leadership. When it comes to stewardship, leaders are out front. And I just share with you from my own experience when I was learning about stewardship and generosity, and I had a lot to learn. Howard Goodrich, who was the regional minister of Indiana when I graduated from seminary, was instrumental in that work and served as a mentor for me. He, when I was graduating from seminary, invited me over to his house for dinner. We had a lovely dinner with Darlene, his wife. All night long, Howard was asking me questions. And not being the sharpest tool in the shed, it wasn't until the end of the evening that I realized that Howard was interviewing me. I had interest in maybe serving a church in Indiana, but he was going to see if he wanted to turn me loose in Indiana. And the last question he asked me that night was the key one. He said, "Tell me about your stewardship. Tell me about how you practice generosity." And it got real quiet. So, well, Howard, I'm a student. I'm getting paid $65 a week and all the pages out of the Bible I can eat. I mean, seriously, how? He said, "Well, let me tell you something. Darlene and I have been in the top 10 giving units of every church we have ever served, though we've never been anywhere near the top 10 income earning units of any church we've ever served." And he said, when you graduate and you get paid real money, you get a real salary, and in a church, he said, you're going to be challenged there to cast a vision. God's going to put a sense of mission, of urgency in you and in the church of things that need to be done. And it's going to take money to do those things. And you cannot ask people if you yourself don't give.
That's right.
And God bless him, he did not throw me under the bus that night. He didn't say, you see me when you're a tither. He didn't even tell me I had to tithe when I left that night. What he said was, I want you to grow. I want you to grow toward the tithe and see how that goes for you. You're going to get real paychecks. So, using that Pauline language, give as you're prospered, increase your giving as you're able, and look at it as a percentage of your income and try to grow toward the tithe. And he said, some years you'll be able to do more, some years you won't. But he said, if you keep trying to strive toward that, so when you finally arrive there, you will discover that the tithe is not the ceiling, but rather the floor.
Yes,
And,
yes,
he said, you will discover that that it's fun to give to things that you believe in. It's meaningful to do that. It's rewarding to do that. And he said, I'm sure you will discover, and God love him, he was right, that you can grow past the tithes, that you'll see the tithe as just one place along the way in which your giving has grown. And Howard was right. it also made it possible for me then in my first church out of seminary to say to my elders, look, here's where I am. Here's where I'm trying to go. How do I get there? And to have elders have a real honest conversation about their own giving, opening that door and that challenge. And it was fascinating. There were some in the room who talked about being tithers and that they had been most of their life. It was the way they were raised, often coming from a tradition other than the disciples, I hate to say, but they had been, back to their allowance when it was $1 and they were paid in dimes, and the first dime went to the church. And we heard some interesting stories. There were other elders at the table who clearly had never, ever considered what tithing might look like. But we agreed together that we would seek to grow in our giving. We didn't put a number on the table. We didn't put pressure on anybody. We just said that as leaders of the church, and with the potential we have to do ministry in our community, we need to work at this together. And they did. And the church grew in its giving and remarkably also grew in its attendance. It grew in its impact in the community because it had more resources to make itself known in the community. And it was an interesting occurrence. When I got to my next church, we were already tithing, and then we were looking to grow beyond the tithe, and we had 3 kids in college, and it was like, how do we do this? And the same kind of conversations, the same kinds of challenges. And I love to tell this story that the last church I served before I took this job, not 1, but 2 of my elders got audited by the IRS. Well, they didn't really get audited. They got a letter. Their giving had increased so much, somebody noticed. And we, of course, because we kept good records and did our due diligence with financial things, could confirm to the IRS that the number that they were sharing that they had given to charity, they actually had given. And that was the end of the matter. That was all the IRS wanted, was the church's affirmation that, in fact, what they had been told was true. And now it was helped by the fact that we did a major building campaign and folks gave way above and beyond. This wasn't just annual giving that had triggered this for them, but their annual giving had obviously grown as well, and their sense of investment of the church had grown. And that was leadership. And it started with the pastor and then pushed into the elders, and then we tried to expand it to the diaconate and to board members, Sunday school teachers, that challenge was out there for us. That it was spiritual practice to be generous, to be thoughtful about the resources we've given. And we covered all the biblical stuff on this in the last webinar, so I'm not going to re-rehearse that. But I just think it's important to claim the role that leaders play, particularly when it comes to stewardship, growth, and that one key element of vitality. That we cannot underemphasize this, cannot overemphasize it. We could underemphasize. We cannot overemphasize this. And again, it's an honest conversation. If you're not a tither, it's okay to say I'm not, but I'd like to be one. And how do I get there? And it's an aspirational goal, and it's a motivating goal, and it's something that you can pray over as you are making that annual commitment. And what does it look like to take the next step up in my giving, and to be able to share that challenge with others and encourage them to come on that journey with you. I just think this is the most fundamental piece as it relates to stewardship and vitality that there is in everything that we do. And it's incumbent on the leader to set the tone and to honestly talk about where you are. People appreciate those honest conversations. And I'm always be grateful to Howard Goodrich for his challenge to me. I just think that's important. So I'm going to push us away from leadership now to what really now becomes the fundamental piece around vitality in congregations. And again, we're going to relate this specifically as it is with stewardship issues, but broader issues as well. And that's your vision. Do you have a clear and concise vision, and do people know what it is? We're looking for what I call the Goldilocks principle here. It can't be too big that we're going to save the whole world for Jesus. Well, that's great, but how are you going to dashboard that one for me? I really like to know how you're going to measure how you're doing there. You don't want it to be too small because you want it to challenge people. It needs to be appropriate to who you are as a congregation. What are the resources and assets we have? What are the gifts and talents we have? What are the needs that are in our community that match up with those, that we can merge those, that there can be a joining where our gifts and the community's needs intersect and meet. That's a very holy and very wonderful place. If you make your vision too big, you'll die from what I call the paralysis of analysis, right? Because you'll be in perpetual failure. You won't be able to reach the vision, and that will be frustrating. So the vision needs to be something you can accomplish. And as I say, it has to be feasible to be believable. You don't want it too small that it lacks imagination and creativity, because that just leads to stagnation. We want to be the church we've always been. That's the way some visions could probably be written, which would be unfortunate, because you want it to have a sense of facing outward. A just right vision has measurable goals and objectives. It's small enough to be achievable, but it's big enough to not only need our best effort, but a little help from the divine. And when I talk about measurable and achievable here, let me talk about, just as an example, the Center for Faith and Giving has a broad vision. We want to create a culture of generosity across the life of the church. A step down from that vision, we have a mission, and that's to create resources that teach generosity as spiritual discipline and a whole life response to God. Under that mission, then, we have measurable objectives. We have a website that has particular kinds of resources on it that help congregations. We create annual campaign resources to help individual congregations. We engage in ecumenical experiences to broaden our own knowledge and share the knowledge we have, so that we grow the resources we have. I mean, we have measurable points that when the board of stewards meets to evaluate our work, we can say, are we doing these things? And what's the evidence of that? And congregations often fall down here. We might get a pretty inspiring vision. Often they're too long, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But we might have an inspiring vision and or mission. We may, conflate those, and that's okay. But then that's it. We don't talk about how we dashboard those things. And part of maintaining that vision is to be able to measure it, to dashboard it. So, that's how that works itself out. I guess I should have changed slides there for you, but that's in essence, what we do, and how we can measure it. The important thing about vision is that it's the red thread that runs through everything you do. And it does so both horizontally and vertically. Horizontally, every decision you make should face the vision statement and ask the question, how does this help us do our vision? How does it help us answer our why as church? So whether that's budget, whether that's staffing, whether that's a project we want to say yes to, or maybe more importantly, no to, it's judged and evaluated through the lens of the vision. That runs through all of the things that we do. It should be reflected in our bylaws, in our Constitution, in the way in which we develop our culture. All of it should face the vision and ask the question, how does this help us do this? The plumb line is the measurement. We go back to the dashboard, right? We drop that vertical line and we say, how well are we doing these things? And your budget, for example, can be one of those things that you say one of our priorities is evangelism, but your budget says we give all of $500 of our $250,000 budget to evangelism. I'm going to say that somebody hasn't asked the right question in building the budget about the vision, right? That we've fallen down here someplace. If we're not dedicating resources to the work, right? That's how the budget and this vision piece intersect. As we're building that, we're building a plan for ministry. We're building a plan for living out the vision. Vision needs to be in the DNA of our folks. When it's short and concise, it's value driven, and people understand it and they own it, makes all the difference in the world. You know, I use the Red Cross and Salvation Army and American Cancer Society as examples. Excuse me. If I say the Red Cross, you're going to think of at least two things, right? You're going to think of roll up my sleeve and give blood, or you're going to think of immediately showing up in the face of disaster. You know what they do, and those things are not unrelated. That's what they do. They show up in a time of crisis. Rick's in Mayfield. I'm sure the Red Cross had boots on the ground within 48 hours. That they were there. They show up. We know that's what they do. The Salvation Army, most of us don't even know it's a church, but we know the red kettle. We know that when we see the red kettle coming up here, we're going to start to see him again pretty soon. Christmas is coming, folks. We know that means a hot meal and a safe place for someone to stay who's in need. And so we know, we associate what they do, right? When we hear their name, we know what American Cancer Society is about, finding a cure for cancer. They express that, you know, in more birthdays or whatever, right? But what they're trying to I mean, who of us hasn't had somebody in their life touched by cancer? And we know about the American Cancer Society, right? And probably even have given them a donation, because we know what they do matters. And that vision is clear. We don't know all the details, but we associate what they do with something that matters, that we want to invest in. And that's what needs to happen with our congregational visions. They need to be constructed in such a way that people want to be a part of it, that they want to invest in it, that it casts a challenge and an ideal out there that we want to be attached to, and that we want to support. We have noticed that when we're looking at thriving churches, and I've mentioned this already, that they are focused outward. Yes, they know they got bills to pay, but paying the bills is not why they receive an offering, and it's not how they talk about money. They don't talk about raising a budget. They talk about funding their vision, living out the vision they believe God has given them in the place they are to do the things that they have the capability to do, to be a living expression of the gospel. They don't focus, the language they use, the culture they have around conversations about money are radically different than, well, you know, the insurance is due next month, or we got to put a roof on the place, or we got to do those things. But if we're going to talk about them, we're going to talk about ways in which they empower our vision and help us live it out, rather than simply as a cost center and everybody pony up so we can pay the light bill. I got my own light bill to pay. I'm not terribly excited about paying the church's light bill. But if you can connect the light bill to the meetings that take place in the church during the week when I'm not even there, that are transforming people's lives through, say, a 12-step program or a Boy Scout program, or you've got a counseling group, or you got whatever you've got going on in your building, well, that's huge. I can remember I worshiped in a church in Kansas City several years ago, and they were living this out beautifully. I mean, one of the things we often don't do is do a good job with that moment before the offering. Well, this church was doing some really fun things with that. And the Sunday I was there, 3 services, a different person at each service came forward and said, "Hi, my name is," this guy was Dave, the one I remember most. And that was a cue for people who know 12-step programs, what was about to happen. But most people had never seen this guy before. He came in, stood at the chancel and said, "You don't know me. My name is, but I want to tell you that you saved my life. About a dozen years ago, all I cared about was my next drink. I lost my family. I lost my job. I nearly lost my life. Someone brought me to the meeting that's here, and they had a name for the meeting on Thursday nights. And it changed me. He said, now it took me a while. I was off the wagon more than I was on it. He said, I struggled, but I finally found my serenity. And I've got a family and I've got a job, and I'm trying to help other people find their serenity. And I just want to thank you for making this space available, because it's made all the difference for me. And then he just walked out. A lot of what we call folding money in the offering plate that day, right? Made a direct connection between the church, its facility, what was going on in that offering plate, and mission that mattered. So we're not paying the light bill. As I often say, most people don't care how much you pay for toilet paper. They just care that it's there when they need it, right? That's not what drives them when it comes to giving to the church. What drives them is the outcome-oriented nature of your ministry, that it's changed their life. They know it's changing someone else's life. They know that its witness in your community is important to someone. And that matters. A study done before COVID, and that's pretty much the case of every study right now. We're just now getting some new studies launched, but before COVID, reflected the terrible news that for most of our congregations nationwide, Christian church, not disciples, we're talking Christian communities as a whole, less than 5% of operating income went to things outside of the church's life. And we should be able to do better than that. I think at the very minimum, we should be tithing. If we want to teach people how to tithe, it might be good that the church knows how to tithe, right? That it can give money away beyond its own doors, beyond its own immediate benefit, that it can demonstrate what generosity looks like and invite people into it. That inspires generosity. And so that's a big piece of vision. So I'm going to stop for a minute and give you all a chance to plug in here, and then I'm going to pick up again, and we're going to talk about the next two elements. Anybody got something they want to share or respond to?
When you talked earlier about the Goldilocks principle, I immediately thought about, to quote my former secretary that passed. She used to say, we're a little church that thinks big.
Mm-hmm.
And here in Kentucky, we all know that phrase, go big or go home. So, maybe you have a phrase similar to that in your neck of the woods, but I can't help but wonder if the Goldilocks principle could be modified to be more reflective to the culture per se. Because little church that thinks big, we all get that because, we're not really that small by statistical standards, but proximity and size and where we're at out in the middle of nowhere, we're small. But, we think big, and we pull rabbits out of a hat. We beat bushes, and I just can't help but wonder if we're doing something right, because we've not been in that 5% category in my tenure.
Okay. That's great.
So, but I know we have room for improvement. And when you, in that comment about not in conflict, I have never been to a church growing up attending that has not been in some form of conflict.
Well, here we're talking major conflict.
Okay.
Yeah, there's always conflict. You get two human beings in a room, there's going to be conflict. Heck, sometimes I'm by myself and I got conflict.
But I just wonder if you could touch a little more on the cultural endeavors.
Culture matters. But that Goldilocks principle is designed to get at what's real for us. So if, dreaming big is real for you, and you're able to do that in ways that inspire people and they feel and accept that, that's great. I do think your own context matters. What we're talking about here in more general terms is just being realistic with who you are, because if you're going to dashboard it, if you're going to really measure it, then you don't want to set yourself up for failure, and you don't want to become stagnant because nobody's being challenged. That's really what we're getting at there, Chuck. Others, anybody want to comment on vision or leadership? I think we're Cicely, we cannot understand you. You are breaking up. If you are addressing the group, we cannot understand you, and we'd love to be able to know what you're asking.
Oh,
Would you-
I'm sorry. I
Oh,
just said that I'm loving the mindset and perception of how you saying don't look at your bills, put them as part of the vision, and it's a different way to look at things, and I'm really excited about that.
Okay.
How you put that perspective, and also when you said don't see tides as the ceiling, but see it as the floor. That was awesome to me.
Well, I've got to credit Howard Goodrich with that, and I'm glad I could share it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Anything that stuck out for you want to comment on or question? All right. The next piece is education. And what we have, most of us, I think, who've been around for a while know discipleship doesn't happen by accident. And thriving churches are working to move people toward growth and deeper spiritual expression. There's a deep commitment to discipleship. So when I say discipleship and education, I'm using them interchangeably. Understand that when I think of discipleship, I'm thinking of a combination of things that include worship and study and prayer and service and generosity, that there's a combination of things. But the overall flavor is the churches that are thriving, whose members are excited and engaged, are churches that are teaching the faith and the challenges that teaching the faith offers. They've got a plan for that, as a friend of mine would say, that when you hit the door, there's an understanding that we're going to take you as you are and love you that way, but we're not going to leave you that way. We want you to go deeper in your faith. We want you to grow in your ability to serve. We want to deepen your experience of worship. We want, your commitment to the gospel to flourish, and for you to express and exercise and grow your gifts, from which we all benefit. And it's pretty clear that the churches that are thriving do this. And we know that churches that are teaching stewardship in particular, again, our focus is more a little money driven tonight. The churches that are including that in their discipleship program do better. Churches that talk about giving more than once a year do better than churches who only talk about it once a year. Churches who talk about it every month do churches that do better than churches that are talking about it only 6 times a year. That's a good statistic from Giving USA, and combined with work the Lake Institute has done with a study on congregational economic practice, that churches that want people to grow in their giving talk about it, and they teach it as spiritual discipline. And again, those conversations about the money itself always get tied back to mission and ministry. They don't talk about budget. They talk about what the church is doing and engaged in the lives it's changing. It's also, and this touches back to what I said earlier, that expectations are set for membership and for leadership. that we expect you to give when it comes to the stewardship side, the money side of things, the generosity practice. We expect you to. And we expect you to prayerfully discern how God is calling you to use the gifts you have to help us do the things as church God has called us to do. And we believe you'll faithfully engage in that. They do pledge campaigns more than not in these churches. They have some moment, if not what we would think of as a traditional pledge drive, they have some moment where they are asking people to think about their giving and to make a commitment, whether they're writing it down and turning it in or they're doing it prayerfully, that they're doing an honest evaluation of their giving and their assessment of if they can grow and how they will grow. And that's a prayer-soaked spiritual activity. But it's expected they will do that. And leaders are expected to be leaders in giving. That when you come in as a member, you are at one level of the practice of generosity. And as you get tapped, you grow in your faith and you get tapped for leadership. Part of that is that we would expect leaders to give. I would not want to serve a congregation where my leaders were not generous. I want to be surrounded with people who are. Now, this doesn't mean the size of the gift per se. We're not just saying our biggest givers get to do this, right? Because we're always thinking about capacity when we're measuring generosity. It's not a number, right? It is set in the context of an individual's capacity. I got a member of my church whose local business, according to information through the Chamber of Commerce, grossed $10 million last year, and his annual gift is $5,000. $5,000 might put him a little higher on the chart than a bunch of people, but it's not terribly high on the generosity chart when it comes to capacity, right? Of an individual-owned business that's grossing that kind of dollars. That's a person I need to challenge in the level of their giving, in a nice way, but it needs to be out there. That we give in relationship to our capacity, and that expectation is there. So that's a part of what we see in congregations that are flourishing, that have the resources they need to meet their mission, that they really take this seriously. And I'll be honest with you, if I ever went back to a parish, had the opportunity to do that again, discipleship would be my main focus. That I just, as much as we did a lot of things well, and I'm proud of the ministries that I was a part of, I would do more with those elements of discipleship. I think they are key to building strong churches. So people are expected to give of themselves as a faith practice, including their time and their talents. We want to talk about those things as well. And we're introducing this stewardship conversation in lots of places. I tell a story on myself. One year when the pastor's class had all been lined up and baptized, and we're standing on the back wall of the church at the end of service, still dripping wet on the carpet. The tradition at that church was that the board chair came along and welcomed them all to the church, and gave them a folder with all this great stuff that middle school age kids just can't wait to have. A church directory, minutes from the last board meeting, the budget, the Constitution and bylaws. My God, what middle school kid doesn't want those things? And the financial secretary would follow along and hand them a box of envelopes. And I realized when I saw some of the kids looking at those envelopes, and they clearly had no idea what they were, that we were missing the boat when it came to really talking about stewardship in our pastor's class, and about giving and their own ability and their own responsibility to give and to be generous. And we changed that. We see in churches that are thriving that this is a year-round conversation. We don't wait till the end of the year and the budget building time to have a conversation. We talk about generosity year-round. We offer personal finance classes. We certainly did this at the church I was in, that that on a regular basis, there was an opportunity for people to lower their anxiety about money and to start to manage their money instead of their money managing them. That's a freedom you give people. I am not a huge Dave Ramsey fan, but Financial Peace University as a concept is dead on. When we have control of our money, it lowers our anxiety. When we have control of our money and we learn how to manage it well and have it work for us, it increases our capacity to give. And so the church is not only helping its members, but it also will benefit from that. This stewardship conversation in education should include end-of-life planning. It's terribly important that if the church can't talk about death, who can? And stewardship is holistic here, right? I mean, what do you want done with your body when you die? I'm an organ donor. I mean, it's real important to me that you take out of me whatever's still usable to somebody else when I'm done with it. If there's a cornea, a femur bone, if the heart or lungs or something. Now I'm from Kentucky, so liver could be a question. I mean, there's bourbon here. And the liver might not be so good, but everything else that's usable, take it out and use it. And in our case, we've told our kids, burn the rest. We don't want to spend the average cost of a funeral in the United States right now is $15,000. From the time the undertaker picks you up and embalms you and puts you in a nice box and then puts you in the ground in a vault, the average cost is about 15 grand. I don't really want my resources wasted that way. People are going to, walk by you in the funeral home and say, gosh, doesn't he look dead? Because they know I'm not sleeping. We all have different feelings about this. You got to do what works right for you in your culture, in your context. But for my wife and I, this is, and we talk about it. We're open about this. Our ashes are going, part of them to Christ Mount, and we hope the kids will take some to the beach with them one more time. Take us over to the beach on the Carolina coast, and maybe the sea turtles will make a nest out of us. Won't that be great? Because that's our choice, and it's your choice. How long do you want to be kept alive? If I'm going to be a potato, I don't want to be a potato. Unplug me. Use those resources for something else. Give those machines to somebody else who's got a chance for some kind of life. If I don't. Now, if I got a case of the flu, please don't unplug it so you can charge your cell phone. But if I'm just, there's not hope that things are going to get better, I'm not afraid of where I'm going. I believe that death is not the end of this miracle called life. And so I'm not afraid. So let me go. That I'm good with that. And I think as people of faith, we need to have those conversations. That end of life planning for us also includes our will and estate plan that leaves money to organizations that we think matter. I serve on the legacy planning committee for the church I attend in Louisville, where I am a member because I have an estate plan. And Laura and I have named whatever church we're a part of at the time of our death to be a recipient of a gift. That's how we didn't name the church because I don't know where I'll be when I die. I could die tomorrow. It could be 20 years from now. I could be someplace else, but I named the church where I'm a member of at the time of my death to receive a gift because I believe it's important. And in my case, for Laura and I, we want it to go to the permanent endowment fund so that it has legs over time. It doesn't get just spent in one evening because the board decided they wanted to do something. We'd rather put it in the endowment and let the interest it earns with the foundation, Christian Church Foundation, let that do some good over a long period of time. We've actually made the church our fourth child. We have 3 children, but our estate calls for the church to receive an equal portion that our children receive of whatever's left after all the settling is done. And it allows us to be a little more generous. And it don't, if we were going to leave 10%, it effectively only costs each kid 5% to go to 25. So why not? That's what we've chosen to do. But I'm happy to tell that story because stewardship has these end-of-life dimensions and to encourage others to consider, what do you want done? The reality is that only 1 in 4 of us in the United States has a will. That's troubling to me. Now, the real reality is that the state of Kentucky has a will for you if you don't have one of your own, but it may not be the way you would like it to be. They may not disperse your assets the way you would like them to be dispersed at the time of your death. So I think it's an important part of our work as stewards, as leaders in the church, as a part of our education and discipleship, to offer a chance for people to think about these things, to be encouraged to do that. For families, particularly that have minor children, it's really important to have a will so that the guardianship of your children is assured the way you want it to be, not the way the state thinks it should be because of some biological or genetic trace. That those are the kinds of provisions you want to make. And I think it's beholden to us as the church to teach these things and to be able to talk about these things with a sense of comfort and not be anxious. The next piece I want to touch on is communication. This is key and probably not surprising, that the churches that are doing well do a good job of telling their story. They do a good job of inviting people in to what's happening and to participate. That the communication is clear, it's concise, it's consistent, which means essentially it's simple, it's direct, and it's timely. You know, when I first went into the church, we did these things called newsletters that we mailed out to every member once a month. Well, and by the time the post office got done, because with bulk mail, it could sit at the post office for weeks, you know, everything that the newsletter said was upcoming, half the time was already done. So how are we getting in front of people? Are we using effectively the social media, the things that are available to us to communicate with people? And are we doing that in a targeted way? Which I'll catch on to in a moment. Part of it has to do, the communication has to do with how we frame what we're talking about. I said earlier about the difference between living the vision and paying the bills. And too many of us have been paying the bills churches instead of living the vision churches. So we're begging half the time, right? We're behind. We can't make payroll. We can't pay the light bill to keep the air conditioner on. We beg, please, you know, or we guilt, which will be productive, but only for a limited time and has negative long-term results called resentment. So instead of begging, do we present it as an opportunity? Do we tie back whatever the need is to our mission? And do we essentially frame it around, here's what God's called us to do. Right now, we can't, but we know we can if we all invest, right, as we're able in this moment. That's real different than we can't pay the electric company. It's different. Communication also, particularly this relates to recruiting people. A personal invitation is always better than the all call. We need a Sunday school teacher for the junior high class. Who's interested? And how many names do you get that way? Not very many. But you know somebody who seems to like middle school kids, God love them, and is actually relates pretty well to them, may have had some at one point in their life. And you say, you know, Mary, would you consider teaching the Sunday school class for 3 months? Not forever, right? You know, because people are always afraid to give it a timeline. And lay out what's necessary. And if you need substitutes, if you need to be away, you know, you're retired and you like to travel, we know that, we'll find a substitute for you. Just let us know when we need the dates. But if you could fill this gap for 3 months and see how that is for you, see how you like it, we'll see how the kids like it. You know, we've really thought about this and we think you have a gift for this and would like you to pray about it. As we have, and if in a week or two, you know, set a time, give us an answer. You're not asking for an answer in that moment because we want discernment. We want them to think about it and pray about it. because their first inclination may be no, and you'd like them to think about it for a little while. Maybe it'll be yes. Their first inclination may be yes out of guilt or obligation, but they have no interest in really doing it. Well, that's not going to work either. So you give them some time and some space. Enlisting your leaders is a spiritual process. So you want to pray over those positions and those people. And you yourself want to seek discernment about those folks. Again, I say don't use guilt or threats, doomsday prognostications, that doesn't help. Again, it builds resentment. And you know how that works. Sometime when we're running behind, well, we're going to have to fire the youth minister because we can't pay the bills. Again, this is not a good way to ask for money. And don't undersell the position. It really doesn't require, we'd like you to be a deacon, but the Constitution says you should meet, once a quarter, and you should serve every fifth Sunday. And, we'd like you to be at the board meeting every quarter. But really, if you can't do those things, that's okay. We just really want you to be a deacon. Who wants to sign up for that if it doesn't really matter? Right? The position should be worth saying yes to. And so that's all a part of this overall communication of what we talk about, how we infuse the values of what we're about into the lifeblood of the church. Here's where we get now into a little more technical side of things that has to do with just the kind of communication we send out and interact with people. It ought to be good. Can I just say that? It ought to look good. It ought to have it doesn't have to be on real glossy paper in 18 colors, but if it's been run crooked in black and white on the copy machine, that's not really helpful. People get lots of stuff in the mail, right? So if you're doing a mailing, they get lots of stuff in email. They see lots of stuff on social media. If it's humdrum and boring, they're going to respond to it being humdrum and boring, which is they're not really going to respond. It's not going to catch their eye. Your communication needs to be targeted. So you've got a bunch of age groups in your congregation, and they all are going to respond to different ways of receiving that information and different ways of stating that information, the content of that information. When I think of channels, I'm thinking of, US mail, I'm thinking of Facebook, I'm thinking of email, I'm thinking of TikTok, I'm thinking of Instagram, right? I'm thinking of all of those different ways in which we reach people. The telephone, even, God forbid we actually talk to someone, and the content being the way in which we frame it. It means more work for us in this day and age because there are that many more channels, and hopefully in your church, that many more different types of people we're trying to talk to. But we want to target that communication so we're getting the right message to the right person the right way. One size fits all. If you've ever been given one of those shirts, one size fits nobody. It doesn't work. So we need to tailor that communication, the language and the channel, the content, and what we're stating to people that reflects who it is we're trying to talk to. And it's a challenge right now. Some of us still have 95-year-old people in our churches who want mail. They read that newsletter cover to cover. A lot of us have boomers in our church, and I'm one of those who, the bulk mail thing gets shoved with all the other stuff, and I may look at it and I may not, even though it's from the church. I'm going to be honest, right? If it comes in an email, I may open it and look at the headlines, but if it doesn't grab me, if it doesn't have content that interests me, I'm going to be honest and say I only read my church newsletter less than half the time, the whole thing. If there's something in the email that, stirs me to look at an article in the newsletter, then I'll open the whole thing, right? I still don't read the whole thing. Confessions of a pastor, confessions of a church member. So smaller bits of information more frequently are better for me. Social media becomes a pretty good way to access my kids. texting is really good for my millennials. My Gen Xers, not as much. We just got to pay attention to who we're trying to reach and what message we're trying to get them, because we want them to engage. And so the communication matters. In everything we do, remember, we want to tie it back to that vision. We want to tie it back to that mission. We want to be, making it relevant to what it is we believe God has called us to do. Why are we doing this? Why do we always do a spaghetti supper in October? Is it just to balance the budget? Or is there something that comes from that, right? Does that make sense? That everything's tied back to what it is God has called us to do. Why do we do an annual campaign every year, Don? Is it just to raise the Kentucky budget? Or do we want to tell stories of lives that are changed that encourage me to want to give? That's the bottom line for us. It always gets back to the why. It's really important that we understand for young people how important that is. Because while my mother always gave to the church simply because it was the church and that was good enough for her, my youngest son is interested in results. What are you going to do with the money? Well, what difference does it make, right? He's much more apt to click on the Habitat for Humanity tweet he gets that says, we're doing a build this week. Click here to buy a bag of nails, right? $50. Click here to, buy 2x4s, $100, whatever, and he can click and go through the menu, and he knows that's exactly what it's going to do. And our younger people want results. They want it dashboarded. They want to know why they should give, what you're going to do with it, and why it matters. So as the church, that's on us to make that connection. The only reason we ask for money is to do mission and ministry. That's the only reason. There's no other reason for us to have money. Now, that means that the pastor is a part of our doing mission and ministry. That means theoretically our building is a part of our doing mission and ministry, right? That all of those pieces are a part of that. But the only reason we are asking is to do something that matters. Let me stop there, and then we'll get on to one that's pretty obvious, but we don't do well. So let me stop and say, do you have some comments or questions here? Am I way out in left field? Not the first time.
No, I think that you are right on the money. Conversation I just had last night and early this morning, just regarding where we are in terms of Second Christian. And so, no, I'd say keep right on, press the issue. Just trying to write real fast and get it all in so that I can adequately communicate exactly what's needed and what we need to be thinking about in terms of tomorrow, today, and how that is going to communicate or how that's going to be duplicated for tomorrow.
And know that these slides will be available to you, and the recording of this will be available for you to sit down and share with leadership, which we hope you'll do.
Yeah. Bruce, the post office here has caused us to make a change, which we thought everybody would be against, and our board was 100%. Nobody reads the newsletter anymore anyway, like you said. And so beginning in January, we will be emailing and putting it on Facebook and doing those kinds of things and saving several $100s, which
Sure.
can then go for our mission and ministry efforts that we have.
Yeah, let me tell you my real agenda. We'll get the elders back to homebound communion, taking that newsletter with them. We'll get people who go to the nursing homes, taking that newsletter with them. The point is resurrecting a lot of the former missions that we used to do all the time that were routine and tradition that went by the wayside as a result of COVID.
Okay.
Just newsletters a catalyst.
Yep.
But I won't say it publicly.
Let's see if we can delete that from the recording, Don. I don't know if you can edit that out or not.
I think the church board knows exactly what I think.
Edited church board.
Any other comments on this, on communication and education?
Well, let me add one thing. My husband and I had been attending another church for a while and came back to the Christian church in January. I was really, I guess, enthused and excited about the fact that we get text every week as a reminder about Bible study or whatever's getting ready to come up about the board meeting. Each one, and it's not a gang text, it's an individual text. So if I wanted to respond, to that text, I could without everybody having to deal with that. So that's been a really good thing.
That's great. And there are all kinds of great programs that can help everything look personalized and individual. Constant Contact is one of those. And you've got young people in your church who know how to do this kind of stuff with the technology, and it's a shame to let their talent sit on the sideline. If they're looking for a way to plug in and you need that kind of an asset, it's great to go after those folks and ask them, can you help us do this? Can you help us improve this?
Okay.
Even as honest to go to them and say, what would help you read this? How would you like to get information from the church? What would make it accessible and usable for you? We often think we know what the other folk want instead of just asking them what they want.
Right.
So one of the things we don't often do well in church, which is most unfortunate and often surprising to me, is say thank you. I can remember raising this point in a small group session with pastors, and one pastor piping up and saying, well, why should I thank people for doing what God expects them to do? Well, the room got kind of quiet, and then there was a little gentle murmuring here and there, and it didn't take long to figure out really why this pastor's church wasn't achieving its potential and generosity. There were all kinds of issues like that, but this was a telltale sign that, we're not doing fundraising, we're doing stewardship, and they're real different. But we can learn things from the fundraising school as we're doing stewardship that matter, and we ought to apply them. They're good at what they do, and there's some things that they do that fit for us and are usable for us. So why waste that information? And that number one is that professional fundraisers will tell you that you thank people 5 different times, 5 different ways for a gift you receive. Now, we're not going to go quite to that extent, but we're going to talk about ways in which over the course of a year, you can say thank you in a bunch of different ways. It's not just polite to say thank you when somebody does something nice for you, but it is a best practice in the fundraising world. And you will not meet a fundraiser who doesn't know how to do this and do it well. I'll just add, if you ever made a gift to the American Cancer Society or the Red Cross or any other agency like that, Danny Thomas's hospital in Memphis, any of those places, St. Jude, any of those places, I'm willing to bet you didn't have to wait more than a few days before you got a letter.
That's right.
And if you gave an email address, you didn't have to wait a couple days before you got something that said, what? Thank you. Thank you for your gift. Thank you. Here's what we're going to do with your gift. Now, because they can't pass a plate next Sunday to get another one from you, they're going to put in an envelope for you or a QR code or something, a link, so you can make another gift. Fundraisers hate us because 52 weeks a year, we can pass a plate and encourage people to give, and they don't have the kind of access we have. And here we don't always utilize it the best way we could. That thank you should always include a story of what you're going to do with the money or what you've already done with money they've given you. So the money's tied to the mission. To remember that we want to build a culture of generosity, we got to practice generosity. We got to practice gratitude. And that will flow from that. I can think of a bunch of different ways you can thank people, starting with another best practice, which also plays on the internal control side of finances, which is quarterly reports on people's giving. Gives them a chance to look at what they think they've done and what the financial secretary has a record of. If they don't match, then we get to ask some questions. They get to ask some questions. We get to ask some questions internally about why they don't match. And I'm going to tell you that more than once we've discovered an embezzlement problem, fiduciary malfeasance, through quarterly, simple thing is quarterly reports. So they're a best practice on the financial side, but that's not why we're going to do them alone. We're going to do them also because they're a best practice on the thank you side, because what's the first thing we should say in a letter that includes their numbers of their quarterly giving? Thank you.
Thank you.
Because of your generosity, we've done X, Y, or Z, or because of your gift, we're going to be able to do A, B, or C. Always, always, always. My church still mails me a page of numbers. It drives me out of my mind. I don't want a page of numbers. Numbers don't tell me anything. Numbers always need context. They need other information other than, well, you're behind 3 weeks in your pledge, so please pay up, deadbeat. That's kind of the message you get. All you get is the numbers, right? The numbers should be covered with that connection between the money and the ministry. So that's 4 times a year, right? And in that fourth quarter that is actually in January of the next year, you have an opportunity to say, because of your generosity, we're going to do X, Y, or Z, right? We look ahead, not just behind. Or another opportunity to write a note is at the end of the year when you mail the tax statement, right? That can be, or when you mail the pledge card back, you're saying, we understand if they've turned in a pledge, if they've made a commitment, we understand that your gift for 2024 is going to be $50 every week. That's the way you've indicated you're gonna do the gift. That's how much, and that's how you're going to do it. And there's another opportunity to say thank you. First, you're confirming that you got the numbers right, that this is what they've committed to. If you do a pledge campaign and they've given you a pledge card, you want to confirm the numbers you've got are the numbers they intended to turn in. And second, it gives you a chance to say thank you and tell a future story. Here's something we're going to do next year. It's going to be really great because of your commitment. That's possible, right? Just think about it. The kids do a car wash. Somebody should be out there writing names of people from the church who drive by and get their car washed so that we can send them a thank you note. Usually it's to go to camp or on a mission trip. So how great is it if the kid, Mr. and Mrs. Smith came to the car wash and, threw $20 in the bucket. How great if a month later, after they come back from camp or their mission trip, they get a note from a member of the youth group that says, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Smith, thanks for sponsoring, thanks for coming to our car wash. It let me go to camp and I met Jesus and it was awesome." And tell me they're not going to give again next time they have an opportunity to do that. You bet they are. They're going to be first ones to sign up to help the car wash because that touches them in a particular way. The pastor, even if you don't know people's giving, if you know that they give once a year, you can start in January and finish in December with the membership list. Just write a thank you note. Mr. and Mrs. Jones, Bob and Betty, we're just really glad you're a part of this church. Know that you've been in my prayers, and I thank you for the many ways in which you support this church, including financially. Pastor Bob. That's it, right? Really easy. I'd love to get a letter like that as a pastor from my regional minister. We appreciate how much your church supports Disciple Mission Fund. Thank you. A little handwritten note, Don. Not that I'm putting any pressure on you, Don. Not that I'm picking on you, Don.
That's what it sounds like. I was just getting ready to ask you, Bruce. As pastor and as congregation, I don't recall receiving or reading about that gratitude when we gave to Disciples Mission Fund, when we gave the reconciliation offering, when we gave to Week of Compassion. I don't recall ever seeing that. I'm not saying it didn't come. It may have came to my treasurer, but I don't ever recall seeing that or even reading about it in the bulletin.
It's one of the things we're trying to change, Don. I'm on the mission funding committee, and trust me, they have heard this from me.
Yeah.
So I'm well aware that when I point one finger, I got three pointing back at myself as
That's right.
regional minister now. So I hear you.
But I just think that this just makes sense, people, right? The missions chair, somebody gave a special gift and it went to something that the missions committee was doing, just take 2 minutes. I will tell you that when I go to the mailbox, and I do every day, my wife will tell you, I know exactly when the mail truck's coming. And I walk out to the mailbox and get the mail. As I'm thumbing through it, the first thing I pull out is a handwritten first-class stamped piece of mail, always. If there's one in that pile, that's the first thing I'm going to open. To take the 2 minutes to hand address an envelope and to scratch thank you for your generosity on a card, and sign it, means the world to people who get it. And it doesn't take much of your time at all. And we just need to be more attentive to that. I'm going to push us on now just so we can get to these last two pieces because we're coming toward the end of our time. I'm just going to touch on this. Our next webinar is going to deal with this in detail. But flourishing congregations are trustworthy with the money people give them. They're transparent. They're open about their finances. Nothing is hidden. There are no secrets around money. You want to know how we spend our money? We'll show you. We may not reveal every staff salary. We may keep those in a bunch. There's some protection we want to offer for various reasons. But if you need to know how your money is being spent, we're going to do that. And honestly, we're going to audit regularly, even if it's just an internal audit, because we can't afford a full-blown external audit by a company. We're going to check to make sure and verify that our records have veracity, that they are true. And we're open at any moment. And we have good policies that people have to turn in receipts in order to get reimbursed, right? That all of that gets checked. That the treasurer who writes checks is not the one who reconciles the checkbook. There's somebody else looking at the checks and doing the balancing to make sure that everything's the way it's supposed to do, that we've got good internal controls. And we have lots of fiscal policy. You can see them there. We're going to talk about those in when do we get together? In January, I think, Don, right?
Yeah.
December. We're doing this
December
in
9th.
December 9th. We're going to go into that in detail. So I'm not going to overemphasize it here other than to say it's one of the things we see in flourishing congregations. And the last piece, and then we can just kind of have some open conversation, is innovation. That you're willing to take an appropriate risk. My God, we've always done it that way before. Maybe it's time to try something new. Not just to try something new, something that's appropriate, something that makes sense. And, there is a risk it might not work. And that's okay. We're willing to fail even spectacularly if that's what happens. Because we have an inkling, we have an idea that this is what we should be doing, and we've tested it, and it seems feasible, and to us it seems like it ought to work, and we're going to measure it and make sure that it does the things we want it to do. But we're going to try something new as a sign that we're moving forward and we're not afraid of new things. We're always asking the question, what's next? We're never satisfied with where we are. Flourishing congregations stay that way because they continue to ask that what's next question. That's crucial, that we don't rest on our laurels. I'm afraid that may be what happened to the church in many places, that, it had always been successful to just open the doors on Sunday morning and people showed up. It was always successful just to tell them we need more money for next year's budget, and they gave it to us. It was always successful to put out pizza and the kids came. Well, it's different now. So what are the new things we need to do? And what makes sense for us based on our mission and based on the talent we have, the capacity we have, what makes sense for us to give it a whirl and see if it works. And the worst that can happen is it doesn't. But imagine what could happen if it does. And that's hard to do when we have an inward focused mentality and we're afraid that all we can do is stay open. And I'm going to declare to you what I most earnestly believe, that the Church of Jesus Christ is worthy of a mission more than simply staying open. Right? We are worthy of more than just being able to pay the pastor and keep the lights on. The Church of Jesus Christ has to be more than that. And I think, these are the things we see. We see them pretty consistently, that most of these elements are at play. And those churches seem to have what they need financially to do what it is they believe God's called them to do. They're always stretching, they're always reaching. It's never easy. Sounds like church to me. But they really are able to get to where they believe God's called them to go. And what a gift that is for the people who are a part of a congregation like that. What a gift to a pastor it is to lead a congregation like that. And I believe that we can get to most of these things. You have to look at these individually to your context. And we're happy to read newsletters, your communication. We're happy to look over the policies you have relative to transparency and best practices. We're happy to have these conversations with you. We're happy to talk about encouraging your leaders. That's what we're here for. That's what this grant is about. And so I want to encourage you to give some thought to this, to kind of measure these things as you see them in your context, and then reach back and let's talk. Okay. Don, you want to facilitate some discussion and questions, and we're going to run past our time here. And I thank you all.
Yeah, we're
for
past our
being a
time,
part
but
of it.
we do want to open it up for if there are any questions for Bruce that we can answer this evening.
Don, I'm going to want you to give me what I need to contact to get copies of that video and the slides.
Okay, well, if you just
I'll send Don the slide deck tonight.
yeah, and if you
He'll
just
have the
contact
link.
me, if you email me, then I will send you the slides, and the video will be coming shortly thereafter. But I want to thank you all for joining our conversation this evening, and know that this is the second of 6 webinars. Our next webinar will be held Saturday, December 9th from 10 a.m. to 11:30 Eastern time. And it's going to be over the best financial practices, protecting your people and your assets. And so we look forward to you joining. Maybe you can get members of your congregation to join, or you can just go through the webinar, then get the webinar recording and sit back with your people and have conversations therein. And then we can come back to Bruce, because we'll send Bruce out. Bruce wears a cape. Y'all don't see his cape?
Now, capes are trouble, according to the what was the name of that cartoon? Anyway, the superheroes that were a family, whatever that was. Yeah, I don't wear a cape. I'm just a regular. Incredibles. Thank you. Yes. But I am available. I mean, that the grant provides time with me individually for your congregation via Zoom. So please utilize that. That we want you to have access to these tools, and we want to have conversation with your folks about how to employ them.
So we just reach out and touch you by text or by email.
Yeah, who was that? Reach out and touch someone. There's a memory.
Diana Ross.
But there's a long distance commercial that went with that from the Bell system, probably.
Right.
That's Diana Ross.
Yep, you can email me. And I'll put that in the chat right now, and you can also call me. I do answer my phone, but it will go to voicemail if I don't recognize your number, because I really do not need another auto warranty policy or another Medicare Advantage plan. I'm really good on that stuff. So leave me a voicemail and I will call you back.
Okay. All right, 3. All right, thank you. It just disappeared.
Still there.
It's there.
I don't know. It went off mine. Your picture is there, but all I got was
Well, look
31.
at the bottom of your screen is a menu of things, and click on the one that says chat. Looks like a little cartoon balloon. And that'll bring it back up on your screen.
Okay.
317-238-9600.
I thank you very much.
Well, you're more than welcome.
Well,
I
thank
hope
you
this
all.
was worth your time tonight. I look
Oh.
forward to being with